Tonight's program is a conversation about energy in Connecticut and how we can lower our costs. Senator Ryan Fazio is going to be presenting. He is our elected senator who represents the 36th district, which includes Greenwich, Stamford, and New Canaan. Ryan is the ranking senator on the legislature's Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee and on the Energy and Technology Committee. He's also on the Transportation Committee, Planning and Development, and Education. We're also joined tonight by Representative Tom O'Day, who represents the 125th Connecticut House District, which includes New Canaan, Darien, and Stamford. Tom serves on 4 committees: Environment, Judiciary, Legislative Management, and Transportation. So during our legislative kickoff program, energy was, if not the biggest, maybe the second biggest topic of conversation. And tonight, Senator Fazio is back to be joined by Tom during Q&A, and they're going to discuss in more detail their vision for reducing energy costs in our state. But first, we're going to move to a word cloud. Does everybody know what a word cloud is? Okay, Jackson, do you want to explain that?
No, I got it.
Oh, Peggy. Okay, so I don't know if all of you know Peggy Taylor. Peggy's the Director of Public Affairs for the Senate Republican Office, so Peggy's going to come and talk us through this word cloud.
Thank you, Mickey. Hi, everyone. I'm Peggy. I think I said hi to most of you on your way in, on your arrival. This is Jackson Shostak, who's on my team. And we just, while we're waiting for Senator Fazio and Representative O'Day to arrive, they'll be here any minute, coming from Hartford. We just wanted to invite you to participate and let us know how you feel about your energy bill. Right now, I believe we're the second highest in the state for energy costs in the continental U.S. So we're hearing from a lot of you up in Hartford about the situation, whether you're a resident or a business owner or both. This is definitely a strain on everybody in their lives right now in regards to our cost of living in Connecticut. So Senator Fazio is going to talk to all of you about some proposals he's put forth at the Capitol this session. But before he gets here, we thought we'd invite you to scan this QR code. You should be able to do it from your chairs. Jackson's kind of show you how that works. Once you do that, you just click on the link. Sorry, you probably can't hear me. Click on the link, and that'll bring you to the portal, and you can just enter in how you feel about energy bills in Connecticut right now.
Those of you who've never done this before, you can scan the QR code by going to your photo app, open your photo, and then hold it up to that QR code, and then open it, and it'll take you right there.
I can come down and help you folks.
Yeah, sure. If anybody needs help, just raise your hand.
So we can see a lot of you are not happy, at the least. Hurting industries, frustrated, angry, disgusted, angered, shocked. Senator snuck in. Want to come up and join me, Senator? So you can see your constituents have some things to share with us here on the screen with how they feel about their energy bills right now.
I do apologize for being late, and I see Mr. Representative O'Day. I just beat him by a hair. Come on up, Tom. You didn't miss anything. Now, I do think I have a good excuse for being late. I think the very last vote I cast on the Finance Committee before I scrambled down here was against a tax increase. So I think we're okay with that in New Canaan, being late to vote against a tax increase. But before we start, I want to hand it over to the dean of our delegation here in New Canaan, Representative Tom O'Day.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Sorry, I'm 2 more minutes late than Ryan. I apologize. Traffic was terrible on the Merritt. No, I'm ecstatic to be here with Ryan. Ryan was the one that did the most comprehensive revision to our power legislation over the last session. So he's going to take the lead tonight for most of the evening. I will throw in my 2 cents every once in a while, but we're very lucky to have Ryan here tonight to go through what we've done and what we're hoping to do. And I'm going to throw in my 2 cents when I can. Great. So Ryan, why don't you start us off?
And thank you, Tom. So I'm just getting here and seeing what people's impression of our energy costs are here in Connecticut. Angry, frustrated, mad, annoyed, confused, abused, ripped off. I see bad legislators in there. I like that one, actually. And I mean that, actually, because I think that will be a theme here in the presentation. But these are all, more than justified impressions. And I can't tell you how many emails, handwritten letters I've gotten from constituents across the district, people across the state who aren't just upset, but they're hurting. And some people don't know how they can afford their prescription drugs, their rent, putting food on the table for their family because of these exorbitantly high electric bills and utility bills, which have gone up and up in one direction. And I think it's time for a change. We have to prioritize fixing this and making our utility bills more affordable.
Who was here when Pura and Eversource gave a presentation for their bill? All right, a few of you. You may remember there was a lot of blame going on, or a lot of concern, and who do we blame, what do we do? And I said in that presentation, if you remember, who do you blame? Legislators. We're the ones that have enacted the laws that have put on a lot of these things onto your bill. So I told you, hold us accountable, and not just Ryan and I, but the entire legislature, both the Senate and the House. We need to do better, and we're going to go through this PowerPoint to show where we think we can do better. All right?
And we're going to do question and answer at the end, and the staff here will walk around with a mic when that happens, so we can have a dialogue towards the end. I also want to thank the library for hosting us. This is such a great asset in New Canaan. So here we go. Let's begin. So I think that's what we all look like when we turn on the lights in this state, because we know we're going to have to pay for it.
New Canaan resident.
There you go.
Waveney House.
The electric bills are too damn high. How did we get here, and what can we do about it? What do we know? I think most of us can agree on three things, and the point of this presentation is to establish these things. First, electric bills in Connecticut are far too high. Second, that state policies bear much of the responsibility for us having not only high rates, but higher rates than almost all of our neighbors. And finally, that we need state reform. We need to change the state policies and have better state leadership in order to fix the problem and create greater affordability for our state. These are the facts. Connecticut has the third highest electric rates in the entire country, after Hawaii, which is an island, and Rhode Island, which is very small, and they talk funny there. They have good basketball team in Providence, though, so they have great colleges that produce many days.
Yep, thank you very much Ryan, for that plug.
But it's not just that we're so high. It's not just that we are higher than our neighbors, and we basically oscillate between second and third highest in the country. It's that we're more than double the national average, and that our rates have been increasing steadily over time. Just 5 years ago, they were nearly 30% lower than they are now. And that's been whether natural gas prices, commodity prices have been higher or lower. They have steadily gone up. And it's not just that it hurts us in our pocketbook immediately. It's also that it inhibits our state economy from growing. It inhibits job creation. I hear the governor, sometimes say that it's no longer taxes that he hears as the number one concern from job creators and companies. It's actually the energy cost. And you think, especially in heavy industry and manufacturing, and Connecticut used to have some of the best high-tech manufacturing in the country, that they cannot compete and create jobs in Connecticut, and that hurts middle-class families, working-class families, and narrows our economy so that all of the rest of us are forced to pay up in a higher tax bill. 8% increase in manufacturing jobs across the country in the last 10 years, and a 1% decrease in Connecticut. So there's actually been major change in the energy and power sector, in particular in New England, over the last 20 to 25 years, even without state or government direction. So at the beginning of the century, 2000, we had a energy mix, a power mix in our electric sector in New England that was over 40. That was about 25% or more oil and coal, which are the dirtiest sources of power, and not just in terms of carbon emissions, but in terms of air pollution as well. And ever since the natural gas revolution, the fracking revolution that took place in the United States, but including in Pennsylvania, we've seen an abundance of natural gas, which has displaced the oil and coal plants in New England. So without anyone being forced to do this, because of the market making natural gas more readily available, we've seen the retirement, the non-competitiveness of oil and gas plants, and the proliferation of natural gas generation for electricity. So this has not only made our electric grid more affordable, but it's also helped clean up our emissions profile and our air quality substantially over the last 25 years without it being forced upon us, without the state of Connecticut passing a law. We've seen over a 50% decrease in carbon emissions in New England in the last 20 years because of the proliferation, the availability of natural gas in the Northeast and the United States generally, and the retirement of many oil and coal plants.
The only thing I would add is you notice that the actual nuclear percentage went down. I want to see that. We want to see that reverse because that is the cleanest of all.
And that, I think, will go down as one of the historically bad policy mistakes, not just in the United States, but even more so in Europe, that we had the retirement of several nuclear plants in the northeastern United States, even when people were protesting it in Vermont, Vermont Yankee, in Massachusetts, in New York, in New Jersey, and I think Michigan, it would be the next closest, but that is a significant detriment that we're now going to be feeling. So what are we paying for? 2 years ago, I co-authored and passed a law that requires the electric bills in our state to include 4 different categories and instead of just 2 different categories of what we are paying for in those high costly bills. So now you can see not only that you're paying for delivery and supply, but also transmission and public benefits.
And that was not easy. I will tell you, Ryan is being modest if he doesn't say the fact that getting this done was a huge lift and a great accomplishment. So well done.
Thank you, Tom. And the theory is simply this, that you can argue there should be more of this or less of this, but the public has a right to know what they're paying for. And sunlight's the best disinfectant. If you inform people of what they're paying for, what decisions are being made, what costs are being incurred, we can have a more transparent and effective public discourse about where our policy should go because we have an understanding of what we're being forced to pay. So the 4 different categories in our electric bill, I think, now accurately reflect generally where our costs are. First, supply. That's the cost of purchasing wholesale electricity from the marketplace, from power plants and other generators that actually create the electrons, produce the electrons. Transmission is the high voltage delivery infrastructure that takes power from power plants to our towns and cities. That is federally regulated. We have the delivery charges, which are the local utility infrastructure, the poles, the transformers, substations, and so on, that bring low voltage electricity to our homes and our offices and our buildings. And finally, the 4th category is something called public benefits, which is the cost of over 50 different government programs that were passed by the state legislature over many years and are funded through our electric bills. I think we all can generally understand what supply is, transmission is, Delivery is, we're generally familiar with the terms. We see the assets and the infrastructure that we're paying for in broad daylight. But the 57 different government programs that are paid for through our public benefits charge are more opaque. And it was why I thought it was so important for the public to understand it in their electric bills. But here's a list of just a fraction of the 57. And we can go into what they are exactly, but they in total equate to over $800 million per year in taxes and therefore spending through those 57 different programs. If you exclude the contracts on the nuclear plants, which get talked about in the news in eastern Connecticut, and actually we partially fund buy power from the one in New Hampshire, it only goes down to $764 million per year. So for the average resident in Connecticut, that's about $677 per year, and that average resident is paying $2,300 per year on their electric bill. So if your house is a little bigger, like most people in southwestern Connecticut, it could be much higher. But you're looking at 25% of your electric bill in public benefits. Yes, that goes up and down in the pay period. Every 6 months we redo rates and there's adjustments, but that's how it's averaged over a long period of time.
And this is why I said when I was here last, the reason why blame your legislators is because we're putting these taxes, this spending in your electric bill rather than the general fund that comes from the overall taxes.
So, and to Tom's point, the generation or supply part of your bill, that's more of a competitive marketplace. It's not heavily regulated, but to the extent it's regulated, it's something called ISO New England, which oversees the market. That's like they actually emailed me and complained that I used this terminology when they first did, but it's basically like a regional regulator. They create a regional market for New England. It's technically a federal utility. The transmission is mostly federally regulated because it goes across state lines, so it's preempted. Delivery is regulated by PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, and other public utilities commissions on a state-by-state basis. So that's more of a state issue. Public benefits are created by the state legislature in Connecticut. So here is what they look like over the last 10 years, your public benefits charges. Not only are they high, but they've gone up significantly. Now, as I mentioned before, among the 57 different programs, there's charges for our long-term purchases of electricity from a couple different power plants, one in eastern Connecticut, one in New Hampshire. Those can be volatile. Sometimes we're in the money, we're making money from it because it's cheaper than the market when the market goes up. Sometimes it's more expensive than the market when the market goes down. So I put a graph of both the total and also excluding the volatile contracts. So the red bars are, I think, the ones that are the most important to look at for analysis. And listen, these charges were high, but they've doubled since 2018. So they were less than $400 million in 2018. Now they're a grand total of $812 million just in the Eversource system. So just among the 1.2 million Eversource customers.
This is important because I was the only one that was here at the time. When Millstone threatened to leave Connecticut, there was a negotiation. I was not in on the negotiation of the long-term contract. But at the end of the day, if I had to do it over again, I would still vote for that contract. Because imagine if that Millstone left Connecticut, because now whether they're bluffing or not, we won't know. But they said that if we don't enter into a long-term contract guaranteeing rates, that they would leave. They account for what, Ryan? 48%, 45%?
Yes.
So imagine what your bill would be now if Millstone had left. So what you can blame me and the earlier legislator for is the difference between the red and the green to an extent. But I would say to you, I would submit, imagine if Millstone wasn't there and that money was, or that energy was gone. I would tell you it would be a lot higher.
Yes, and our energy costs would be lower if Vermont Yankee Power Plant hadn't retired, if Indian Point hadn't retired. My uncle worked on that plant, the New Jersey plant hadn't retired, there would be a lot more reliable carbon-free energy on the grid at more affordable rates. And so you'd see actually the cost of supply probably lower because you'd have 57 different programs, hard to get your head around. One of my colleagues in the House of Representatives, Tracy Mara from Darien, put together this analysis to try to categorize more broadly what those 57 different programs include. The biggest category is subsidies for private electric generation from solar, from fuel cells, from wind, from nuclear, and a couple other categories. I think solar is probably the largest category. The second of the three biggest categories is kind of redistributive programs. So lower electric rates for lower income purchasers, customers, and also the socializing of payment of unpaid bills. So we had a very generous shut-off moratorium in Connecticut where if you didn't pay your bills, you could still keep your lights on. Normally the way that works is we just have that in the winter months, but in Connecticut for 4 years after COVID, which was the longest moratorium in the country, we had it all year round. So we're still paying for that. That cost might come down a little bit, but the low-income discount has gone up. And then finally, energy efficiency programs, which, again, it just shows you there's complexities in it because a lot of the energy efficiency programs are things that I am supportive of. But they've grown to become the third largest category. That's things like demand response or advanced metering, infrastructure, and so on. So it's difficult even when you break it down into 5 or 6 or 7 categories to get your head around it. But we tried to do it here. Again, the nuclear contracts are about 2% of the cost since 2019 when they were signed. So moving off kind of the public benefits discussion for a little, I want to zoom out because we shouldn't just be making decisions and policy for the current and to alleviate costs. We also have to be thinking about the long term. And electric demand across the country, including in New England over a long period of time, was relatively flat. It grew at a lower rate than the rest of the economy. But we're seeing now across the United States it start to grow at a faster rate than it has historically. And there's 3 main reasons for that, which includes New England and Connecticut. The first is the rise of data centers. Second is the rise of electric vehicles. And third is the rise of electric heat. And in Connecticut, we have policies on the books that are actually subsidizing the growth of all 3 of those categories. But we'll get into that later. Because of these kind of sectoral long-term changes in the New England and the United States economies, we are now expecting significant growth in electric demand and the demands on the power grid over the next couple decades. So whereas currently the peak electric demand during the course of a year might be 24 gigawatts in New England, we're expecting it to rise to 43 in 2040 and 57 in 2050. These are the estimates from ISO New England, that regional regulator and overseer of our electric grid that I mentioned before. These aren't my numbers, but these are shockingly substantial increases in demand that we can expect, which means that we need to find the power behind it, which will not be an easy task. Again, the last analysis, actually something to be concerned about, the last analysis doesn't include data centers. And that's concerning because that might be the fastest growth area. So it only includes the heat pumps and the electric vehicles. I actually think the heat pump estimates might be a little high. That's just my kind of personal opinion. But by not including data centers, there's definitely missing demand numbers here. It's very significant, and it is probably the thing that keeps a lot of our, I think, more keenly attentive policymakers awake at night.
And we have Todd Lavieri here, who was on the Connecticut Innovations Board and can, I think, talk about how data centers are only going to explode. We've actually searched out bringing in more data centers here so that the demand for energy is exploding.
So if you have that much more demand, if you have that big an increase in demand, you have to wonder where the supply is going to come from. Where's the watts? So The ISO New England study, thank you for the laugh. The ISO New England study projects that trying to build 30 more gigawatts, doubling the electric supply in the region to meet a doubling of demand by 2050, that the sources will be primarily wind, then solar, then battery. I actually think their last estimate had more, it is battery. It's wind, then battery, then solar. And obviously battery is a storage device. So when you're producing more energy than the grid demands, theoretically you store it. That's especially necessary theoretically if you're relying more on wind and solar because they're intermittent sources of energy. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. There was a New York study of their offshore wind kind of capabilities as they're building out offshore wind, and they found that there's probably 30 to 40 days of the year where there will be almost no offshore wind generated for multiple days at a time. And so if you're relying heavily on that source, you're going to have to bridge the gap, and it's not going to be easy. Again, they do not run, these sources of power do not run all the time, and they're not predictable, and they're not dispatchable, which, yes, when they're running, they run at a lower OpEx than anything else because there's no inputs. But the reliability problems are something real that needs to be grappled with.
And love him or hate him, 3 years ago, I listened to Elon Musk, who said the key to solar is the battery. You have to have the battery charging up because the sun shines during the day, and the peak hours the sun is down, you need the battery. So one of the things I've been promoting outside of the committee is that any type of energy subsidies we give for solar have to include batteries because that's the answer key.
And this is an area where Tom has been doing work for years, trying to find a strategy for making solar, every kilowatt hour of solar, more affordable. I think solar is one of an important ingredient to our solution in an affordable energy grid. But you got to do it affordably. You got to drive down costs for all these sources. So when we're building out new supply, and the projections are for more of the supply to be distributed generation, so smaller sources of electric generation, solar panels, batteries, that means every single area that's generating is generating less. That also means we're going to have to build out a lot more infrastructure to support the power generation. There's going to be more wires and transformers and substations per kilowatt of energy generated if you're doing more distributed generation. And that's going to have a cost that you're going to pay through your delivery charge. That's where the utilities are going to make their money. And they've come before the General Assembly and estimated that they expect about $2 billion, which is equivalent to $1,500 per household, from upgrades to the substations alone. That's not the wires, it's not the transformers, it's not the poles, it's just the substation investments. So that is a substantial cost on top of generating new electricity. So you'll notice before that the estimate from ISO New England is counting on offshore wind generating more of the long-term power in the future to meet our increased demand. That's been the kind of the general thought process that it would take over. Solar has seen a greater increase as a percentage of the load in the past 10 or 15 years, but now they're anticipating that offshore wind in particular is going to be a greater reliance to meeting the increased demand. The problem is in recent years, we've seen a lot of these plans meet reality. For instance, the state did a joint venture for a pier in New London to service the offshore wind development. The estimates for that project when it was commissioned by the governor and the state was $93 million, and the costs have ballooned to over $300 million. An absolute disaster that we're going to be paying for in our taxes. But also the actual projects themselves, where they were first anticipated to be roughly 7, 8, 9 cents per kilowatt hour. In reality, to build new offshore wind assets, you're going to ultimately be paying about 16 cents per kilowatt hour. Those costs got so great that even our state government rejected the recent bid from offshore wind developers to build hundreds of new megawatts of offshore wind in the Long Island Sound. Massachusetts went in on the deal. Rhode Island went in on the deal. Connecticut, at the urging of some of us, actually did not choose to purchase, to go in on that new RFP. It would have seen your public benefits go up by hundreds of dollars just for that single purchase.
Give Governor Lamont credit for that. He saw the writing on the wall that just didn't make sense.
So this is the best estimate I have of what the costs look like right now for different programs and purchases of energy by energy source. Natural gas is mostly in that unregulated competitive supply market. Those rates vary from 3 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour or $30 to $50 per megawatt hour. Nuclear, the Millstone contract, we have a long-term locked-in rate at $50 per megawatt hour. When we renegotiate that in 2029, which the governor indicates he is supportive of, which will probably happen, maybe it'll go up to $70 or something. But right now it's $50 through 2029. Hydropower, there's a lot of different hydropower assets that are small, run-of-river, dams. Those with state programs, there's some state subsidies, not many for them. Those can go from being sold on the wholesale market at $40 up towards $80, $90 is my understanding. The offshore wind, at the beginning of the industry kind of rolling out in the United States, we were seeing offshore wind done at $100 per megawatt hour. Now it looks like it's $150 to $170. That's probably what the most recent, once it's revealed, that's what the pricing will probably be for the most recent Massachusetts contract. And solar is interesting because there's so many different types of solar. So most of the solar done in the state and in the region is subsidized through our electric bill, through state programs. Some of those, when you have more grid scale solar, obviously you get greater economies of scale. You put it on kind of farmland in the more rural parts of the state or region. And that's purchased at, with all the subsidies, probably close to $100 per megawatt hour. Whereas the smaller scale solar on rooftops, so on and so forth, that's procured at $330 per megawatt hour under the state's RRES program. So that's 8 or 9 times the market rate for electricity. That's why there's such a degree of variance, because there's such different projects with such different economies, and there's different government programs in the state of Connecticut to procure them at such different rates.
Another reason why batteries make sense, rather than having to buy it from homeowners.
And on the right, again, we talked about the reliability. The lights always have to turn on. The heat always has to go on. In an advanced country, in a developed country, the air conditioning always has to work, because people die if that's not the case. People die when it's 100 degrees if their air conditioning isn't working in the summer. They're even more likely to die if they have electric heat and it's not working in the coldest days in the winter. And so it's not an option going forward whether the power turns on the coldest days, on the hottest days. That's why having reliability in our grid and being able to bridge, intermittency is so important. So nuclear has a capacity factor, which is basically how much it runs over what its capacity is, of over 90%. Natural gas, hydropower is kind of in the middle, wind and solar, and those are contingent on weather. And so when our grid is stressed the most, even currently, what happens, and this is why, it's not always what's on its face happens in reality. When the grid in New England is stressed the most in the coldest days and the hottest days, we actually start running on those old oil plants that are fired up in order to meet the extra demand. The dirtiest sources, the worst for the air quality, and they're pretty expensive because you have to pay for them to sit idle and then fire up, but you also need to make sure that the lights do turn on those hottest and coldest of days. So this is a couple Christmases ago. This is just what I had handy from a couple years ago. Oil got up to 40% of the entire grid on that super cold Christmas a couple years ago. It can go as high as, I think, 40% or so is what I've seen. The thing is, if you're relying on sources of energy that aren't always running, you need every 5 minutes the grid is going, we need this, dial up, dial down. They go to the most dispatchable, meaning it turns on right away, sources of energy, and that still is the oil plants, some gas plants, but mostly oil plants, and those are also the dirtiest. So there's an interesting comparison, a study I once saw that compared Ontario, Canada, which is heavily reliant on nuclear and hydro, which are zero carbon, clean, but more reliable, compared to Germany, which has been one of the most aggressive places in the world to try to adapt solar and wind. And Germany has 14 times higher carbon emissions than Ontario. 14 times higher, even though they've been very aggressive on wind and solar, because the wind and solar needs to be backed up, in their case, by coal. Unfortunately, Germany also got rid of its nuclear plants, and now it's under the thumb of Vladimir Putin. The alternatives are not acceptable. We can't have blackouts. People's health suffers, people die if you have rolling blackouts. But places like California, where they have more temperate weather, they are experiencing rolling blackouts from time to time when their grid gets stressed because they don't have reliability. That's an open question, has been an open question in the United Kingdom too. This is not an acceptable option.
And our grid is stressed. I had the head of one of the power companies, delivery companies, tell me that because their rates were denied, increases were denied, they're not putting in the infrastructure upgrades that they were planning on because they were denied. And because they were denied, because of what we've seen on the screen here of the public benefits portion, which we're going to get into.
So we painted a picture that is concerning. I think it's realistic, but we're not here just to paint a negative picture. We're here because we actually believe that there are better alternatives to create a more affordable and reliable grid and protecting our environment at the same time. Starting in January of 2023, I co-authored with Tom and other House and Senate Republicans a 6-point proposal that we have since updated 4 or 5 different times, including at the beginning of this year, which would reform our energy regulatory system and costs in order to create greater affordability and reliability in the long term.
And much of this is getting bipartisan support, which we'll talk about.
Yes, we will. So the first part of the plan is to end the public benefits charge. That is a hidden tax, and it basically creates a special category of taxing and spending that is outside the normal budget process. It's basically telling us as a state, us as taxpayers, that all of these energy programs and subsidies, they're more important than public schools, they're more important than healthcare, they're more important than roads and bridges, because they get a privileged position in the processes of taxes and spending than all those programs do, which have to go through the normal 2-year budget cycle, being proposed, getting public hearings, going through public debate, and having to justify themselves before the legislature every 2 years. And economies get found, cost benefit gets done, and you actually create programs that work better and that don't have such an outsized cost and see a 50% increase in total costs. So it's not just a matter of cutting the cost from the electric bill. It's also the fact that some of these programs should continue and should exist, but they need to be regularly vetted. There needs to be transparency, there needs to be accountability, and making sure that they're renewed every 2 years through a vote in the legislature and competing against other needed areas of government funding will give them accountability and will make them more cost effective as well. Some of the programs should go away permanently, but many of them need to stay, and they need to be more efficient, and putting them through the normal appropriations process where they got to get approved every 2 years rather than getting funded through your electric bill where they continue till kingdom come is a better alternative.
And there's bipartisan support in the governor's office, the Senate, and the House for this. So reach out to your legislators and promote them.
And it is rewarding that we've been pounding the table for 2 years on this proposal. Nobody even knew what the words public benefits were a couple of years ago. That took the transparency part. But now we actually have maybe half a dozen. At the beginning of this term, we went from over 60 Republicans proposing this, co-sponsoring this legislation, and then this year we had, I think, 6 Democrats in January propose their own bills for cutting public benefits. So we're starting to see a broadening of support, which is very encouraging. We always want to do things on a bipartisan basis because it makes things better. The second part of the plan is to limit the subsidy in our energy purchases, those long-term contracts that are subsidized through our public benefits. Limit them at no more than 150% of the wholesale competitive market for electricity. 2.5 times seems like a sufficient subsidy for an energy producer, a private energy producer. You might think that that is too aggressive to pay for 2.5 times in and of itself, but as I said before, we have programs that are subsidizing energy production at 8 or 9 times the market rate. So let's try to find a middle ground. I think 150% premium cap on the wholesale market, above the wholesale market, is reasonable, and it'll save a lot of money. And it'll give these industries religion. For these industries to succeed in the long term, they need to compete on price. It's not helping anyone when you give them a handout, because eventually it all comes crumbling down. So that's the second part of our proposal. Again, I think the analogy is you wouldn't go to the mobile Gulf station on South Avenue and pay $10 or $11 for a gallon of gasoline. No jokes about the cost of gas in New Canaan compared to the other places. So the third is to reclassify our renewable energy program. We have something called a renewable portfolio standard. It's one of the several ways we subsidize renewable or cleaner sources of energy. But the renewable portfolio standard does not include all hydropower and all nuclear power, even though they are zero carbon, they are very clean, and they're actually more reliable than the other sources of clean energy. So one of the things I was successful at passing, in addition to the transparency in the electric bill, the public benefits line item, was to amend the renewable portfolio standard to include more hydropower and any new nuclear power going forward. So when we're trying to incentivize that new lower cost nuclear development, small modular reactors 10 years down the road, we're hoping that that program will help make it happen here in Connecticut, specifically in eastern Connecticut. We're the first state in the union to actually pass that legislation, and I think we're going to be a leader on it. But we didn't do all nuclear, and we didn't do all hydro, and I don't think that's fair. Again, they're all clean. We want them to succeed. We want them to compete on an equal playing field. So we're calling for all nuclear, all hydro classes to be included in the renewable portfolio standard. The fourth is to separate DEEP, which is the Department of Environment and Energy, in Connecticut that makes policy. It's in the executive branch. It reports directly to the governor. And PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, which is the regulator of our electric rates and our utilities. PURA needs to function well in the state in order to protect consumers from any abuses or cost overruns from the utilities, and also create a stable investment climate so we can harden our grid and make it reliable in the long term. By having PURA subordinate in the state government structure, org structure, to DEEP, that's like having the judge work for the governor or the president. There needs to be a separation of powers. PURA is like an adjudicatory body. It's a quasi-judicial body, yet it works for the policy-making body and is subordinate to them in the org structure. Sometimes it might not be explicit how that can, I think, distort long-term decision-making, but we know it's there. We know it's at least subconsciously there, and it's probably not done this way in any other state. But it was made this way in Connecticut 15 years ago for kind of idiosyncratic reasons. We have to go back to a way where we give PURA independence so we can be confident they're protecting us from any overreach by the utilities.
And the Department of Energy used to be different from the Department of Environment. There's a conflict there. I'm not saying we go back to that, but it does make sense.
So the last two parts of our proposal are, first, to eliminate programs that subsidize electric demand. I just painted a picture where we're going to see a doubling of electric demand over the next 20 or 25 years. So who among us thinks that we should be paying more in our energy bills to subsidize new demand on top of that 100% increase? I don't think so. That increases costs just by the subsidies that we're paying every month in our electric bill, and then it increases the total price by creating a greater supply and demand imbalance. We have subsidies for heat pump installations, for private electric vehicle charger installations, and for the rollout of new data centers in the state through a tax incentive. I've proposed eliminating all three of those, having a little bit more trouble getting rid of some of those, but I actually do predict that the large subsidy for private EV charger installations will be rolled back on a bipartisan basis because of the advocacy that we're doing. Finally, we need a way to secure the natural gas supply, especially for the winter months. This is something that after years, the governor has actually come out in favor of. And even Kathy Hochul next door has expressed some openness to either we're going to rely on oil to fill in the gaps, or we're going to rely on natural gas to keep the lights on and the homes warm in the winter months. And the option is very clear, both from a cost perspective and from an environmental perspective.
Only a couple more slides. Questions?
So what can we achieve? If we pass these reforms, I am very confident that we can lower electric bills by 20% in the medium term and cost by even more in the long term. We can ensure that we have an affordable state whose economy grows, who creates jobs and opportunity for everyone, and protects the safety of all. Keep the heat running in the coldest months and the AC on in the summer. We should not be settling for being the second or the third highest cost state in the country. We should expect nothing but the best in this state. And I think with the right reforms, including Senate Bill 647, we can do that. And the public is coming around. People, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican or an unaffiliated, whatever their views are, I believe over the past couple of years, the high costs, the transparency, and our advocacy is making a difference. There was a poll done by a business organization in January statewide that found that electricity has become, and utility costs have become, the number one issue in the state, and 73% of people in the state support cutting the public benefits charge and funding those programs through the normal budgetary process. And now we even have some of our Democratic friends in the legislature who are working together with us to try to make that happen.
There are small businesses that testified that they pay in a monthly benefit charge the same as their weekly employee costs, so which is just crazy.
I do think that people speaking out, contacting their legislators. We had 750 people testify for our bill when it was up before the committee just a couple of weeks ago. I had a long-term state legislator who's been up there, I think, twice as long as Tom has. And he turned to me at, it was like midnight, and he goes, I don't think I've ever seen a bill in my time that has gotten so much positive testimony in favor of it. And that's encouraging. People are speaking up, and it is making a difference. And you are changing hearts and minds of people who make decisions in Hartford. And I'm hoping that we're able to move the ball forward this session because of it. But no matter what, I know we'll still be there fighting for it every single day.
So I guess we've answered all the questions. Have a good evening.
Please raise your hand.
Yes.
Peggy will get you over there, and I'll get you over here.
Hi, Peter Slavin, Stanford. Good to see you, Ryan and Tom.
Hi, Peter.
75% of our Earth is water, and I know you have hydro energy on your top 6, but I think it might be underestimated. And Elon is leaving the administration soon, and Tesla is coming out with the hydrogen car next year. So he's moving on it, and you can be sure he's going to be focusing on it soon. So I just think there ought to be a study, in my opinion, not only in Connecticut, but why not all 50 states join in together and, have some percentage of the budget go towards a long-term study on, the efficiency and how water can drive our energy costs down in the long run.
So I'm embarrassed. It was either Sweden or Norway. I can't remember which. Hydro accounts for the vast majority of their power. They're way ahead of the curve. And so I don't think we need a study. We just need to talk to them and how they did it. And the governor, in his initial budget address, said that we need to focus on hydro, and he wants to expand it from Canada. So that is happening, but you're right. We certainly could move that up on the priorities.
Hi, Ryan Bollinger, New Canaan. I'm currently 18 years old, so I can't pay energy bills yet. I'm still in high school. But I'm still
So you
concerned.
can't vote, 18.
Yeah, I missed it this year, but just a couple days. I'm still concerned about our planet's future and obviously energy bills. Great talk today, thank you. But I'm wondering, I saw that I think it was almost 40% were reliant on natural gas, and I've seen the natural gas projects happen since I've moved into town the last 5 years. All those pipelines ripping up the roads and everything. I understand why we're following the curve with the natural gas revolution, but as we're trying to meet the 2040 net zero carbon goal that the Connecticut government has set, I'm wondering, is that the right step? Are we to look at more nuclear goals or stuff like Pura, and they have the caps on the solar energy costs? What are you guys looking at to try to get away from natural gas? Because I personally don't think that's the right step.
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. And frankly, it's a very difficult question. There's no easy solutions, I think, on this topic. We want to improve our environmental footprint, and we also need to alleviate poverty, create jobs and economic opportunity. And it's not always easy to find the right balance between the two. I think that if you look over our track record of the last 25 years, actually reducing our emissions by 50% in New England, you've seen positive development. And it wasn't necessarily with kind of a heavy hammer mandate type of requirement, but it was allowing the worst kind of form emissions profile assets to be retired in favor of a better alternative. And gas is just a much better alternative than oil and coal. And then the other question is, we still have most of our emissions probably now, coming from internal combustion engines and diesel and gasoline engines. And I don't support forcing people to buy something, one or the other. But if you're going to reduce emissions profiles by changing reliance from more internal combustion vehicles or more oil and gas heat to electric heat and to electric vehicles by persuasion, you're going to have to make electricity more affordable compared to those other sources of energy, of portable energy. And so including gas and nuclear and wind and solar, all of the above, is, I think, the best way both to lower our emissions profile and ensure that there's affordability. If you go too far in either direction, if you say, turn on the coal plants in New England, I don't think that's responsible. If you say, let's get rid of gas by 2040, I don't think that's doable or reasonable. And basically you have Governor Lamont, Representative Steinberg, who's the Democratic chair of the Energy Committee, and Chairman Needleman of the Energy Committee, also a Democrat, all agreeing with that because the numbers don't add up. In the long term, the only way to solve the problem, I think, is technological development. And if you rely on elected officials to ensure technological development, we're going to end up riding bicycles again. But I think specifically the most likely innovation that will lead to a rapid improvement of our environmental profile and improvement in affordability would be the generation of affordable new nuclear technology. And most likely that's going to be small modular reactors. And we want to create a policy kind of framework for making that as easy as possible to generate zero carbon, reliable, affordable energy. The technology is not probably commercializable now, but I do think most people in the industry seem to believe that in 10 or 15 years we can do it. And Connecticut might be a leader in that because, among other things, we passed a law that says new nuclear just like hydro, is going to be treated in a fair way to encourage that development. So I think that we have to be both economists and environmentalists, and we have to balance these things. I think if we do strike the right balance, we can improve our environment for the long term while also making Connecticut's economy grow and affordable for all.
And I agree with that, Ryan. The only thing I would add to that is last Governor Malloy had put in a program to expand natural gas. Now, I hear you, we'd rather have nuclear or renewable energy, but natural gas is much better than oil, and we were expanding that dramatically. I still have oil heat. I'd rather not, but they as soon as the new administration came in, ended that natural gas program. As you may remember, it just ended quickly, so more people who could have gotten on natural gas, which is cleaner than oil, didn't. So I think we need to bring that back. Get rid of the oil, bring in natural gas, increase nuclear. I agree with everything Ryan said. Thank you.
We're going to take turns on either side of the room, so anybody, I think.
Hi, Christina from New Canaan. In terms of other forms of energy, are you looking into geothermal? I know Massachusetts, they have a huge project in Boston that they work with Eversource. It was reminded to me today that Eversource, the utility companies, I think it's due to regulation, they make their money through development of projects, not through rates necessarily. So my sister who lives in Boston explained that Eversource is super excited because they're doing this huge transition to geothermal, which is also zero emissions. And again, I completely understand you're all of the above and agree with it. But are we looking into other things, geothermal? And why is solar so expensive? I don't understand that. I don't see why we couldn't all just be putting solar on our roofs and having batteries in our homes and be more independent individually. I don't understand why it's so expensive.
Those are good questions. I don't know if I can give a very firm answer on the economics of geothermal. I get asked sometimes, and I don't know the answer of what the economics of the industry are. My understanding is it is kind of per unit of energy generated. It is pretty expensive but on the other hand, it is environmentally friendly and it is reliable. That's one of the nice things about geothermal because the Earth's always warm. It should get fair treatment like the other sources of clean energy, and it does. I do think it is incorporated in a fair manner. So I'm open to learning more. My understanding is commercially it's not competing with the other sources. But if there's anything in our state policy that's not giving it, fair treatment, I'd like to know. The solar, in the end of the day, we're going to be victims of geography. We have much more expensive subsidization programs in the Northeast for solar than they do in the Southwest. But the Southwest is much more reliant, has much more solar energy as a percentage of its portfolio because the sun shines, it's flat, there's not a lot of vegetation encroachment, and so. It's just sometimes it's gonna be difficult to put. They're never gonna have hydropower in certain places in the world. Likewise, so there are certain geographical limitations. The sun isn't shining as often here. There's vegetation encroachment. There's not the flattest terrain necessarily. So those things are going to make it more expensive. And then the state policy decisions. I think that if the state moved more of its subsidies, they talked about the caps, if they shifted more of the caps to the less expensive type of solar, we could generate as much solar more affordably. So I think that's a good option for affordability and environment.
And part of the problem, Christine, is I try to get solar, and because of the trees around my house, they said you need to cut down all these trees, and I didn't want to do that.
Hi, John Kuhn. I'm from Fairfield. I'm the chair and founder of the Committee on Energy Initiatives in our town. Just a quick note on that Framingham project, that network geothermal project, that's being paid for in Massachusetts by their public benefit charge. This is mostly behind the meter stuff that I've seen today. There was a bill that was floating around, front of the meter, community power. What has happened to that?
So I've put in a community power bill almost every year, and the unions and the companies kill it. We're getting closer to getting support for it. The governor's in favor of it. I've put in a community solar program bill. Community power, that's a regulatory issue that Pura hasn't been supportive of, and the power companies have not been supportive of. I assume because you're on your town, Fairfield's board, you've heard that. They're just not supporting the community power. Where you're talking about building small micro.
Deregulated, in a deregulated energy utility environment such as we have, the community power program allows for municipalities to act as bulk purchasers for its residents and its businesses. And it's been, we are a deregulated economy or utility regime. And it's been shown to reduce rates, generation rates, which is 30% of your bill.
There was a bill before the legislature this year. So I think we use the term community aggregation. Basically, you could have the municipalities come together and purchase in bulk or individually, and probably hire a purchasing agent to do it. I said I was supportive of it, making it a municipal option and experimenting with it. My gut instinct is it's not going to, revolutionize, significantly reduce on average what people are purchasing in bulk for energy. I just don't think like there's going to be people who can beat the market that consistently, but I'm open to it, and I think giving municipalities the option is something we should explore. So I supported the bill. It doesn't look like it's going to pass this year, but I was supportive of the bill. I would love if my bills just pass and I could attach things to it. I very much hope that that's the case in the future.
We've got the mic on the other side of the room.
Hi, David Wilson from Stanford. First, thank you both for being here and your team being here. Appreciate that a great deal. I may be able to talk to you later about solar and individual. I had an absolute unbelievable nightmare between the Sunrun and Eversource. I called your office and I called the representative's office, and you both were great about getting back to me. Just so you know, the follow-up from your office was not great, but at least they got things going, and I did get great results, but it took a long time. And it makes a huge difference. If you can do it individually, it does depend on the trees. I have oak trees all around. I'm very fortunate the way my house is situated. But I'm telling you, I'm generating a lot. And if you have enough space on your roof and reasonably clear, you will see a material difference from doing individual solar.
Do you have batteries by chance?
I don't yet, but I'm probably going to do that. I wanted to get things running first before I take the second step. When we signed in, you asked for our emails. Can you email us the slides? A lot of us were taking pictures of it.
Yep.
If you have our emails from here, I assume you got them just to see who was here. If you could email us slides, I think everybody would appreciate that.
Happy to.
All right. I have questions on the public benefit side, and I may be confusing one of your statistics that showed it's number one issue, it's 73% or something. Do you have enough support now, Democrat and Republican and independents? Do you have enough to get to pass that to remove the public benefits?
I don't think so. I think we're moving in the right direction, but no, I don't think. I think most Democratic legislators support keeping most of them, but we're starting to see more Democratic legislators in Hartford support taking many of them away, and it's currently a source of a schism among some Democratic legislators in Hartford. So I think the answer to that question is we'll see.
Okay, I'm going to make a comment then, not a question, because I had a long discussion with your office and the representative's office.
Let's keep it moving because we have so many questions.
I understand. You use the word tax, and it's the first person I've heard from the legislature use that. It is a tax. It's a hidden tax. It's going to destroy our state.
Not so hidden.
We're going to have people moving out of here, businesses and individuals, if we don't do that. And I don't think anybody in this room was aware of that as it first came in. It's gotten more public knowledge now. I'm sure it was covered in the bill. I'm sure it was in the paper. But I spoke to 23 people, and not one knew what it was, where it came from, how it came about. So thank you for working on that.
Thank you, sir.
And I think we might have a good chance at this, getting the support from the other side and getting this done. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Not dead yet.
Hi, Mike Morley from Wilton. You had mentioned in your presentation that the data centers are going to increase the demand for electricity in the future. And I was just wondering, can you set up a separate price structure for those companies that are driving up the demand with the data centers? That's one possible solution. And the other is, I'm aware that Google has stated publicly that they're very concerned about reliability when it comes to the data centers, and they are going to be constructing their own power source for their data centers.
Yes, and I like that latter idea, and that's actually a way that decommissioned nuclear plants are coming back online, including the one in Michigan. I forget which of the big tech companies is bringing back a decommissioned nuclear plant in order to power one of its large data centers, and that would be a great solution for the grid because it doesn't take off new energy supply to do something that is economically important. We want data and computing power to be part of our economic story. And to your first point, we don't need to penalize them. We need to stop actively subsidizing, right? We should stop giving special treatment to the new sources of demand and treat everyone fairly. You know, mom and pop don't get a special tax break for using the same power grid everyone else does. But if you're a data center in Connecticut or Massachusetts, you're going to get a special tax break. So I just proposed eliminating the special tax break. I couldn't even get that passed.
They're actively trying to get them here. So everybody's fighting to get the data centers in their state. So that's why there's a lot of these state the tax discounts.
Hello, Tom Herman from New Canaan. Thanks for being here. This is a super critical issue, so I appreciate it. I also think that some of the numbers that you presented as far as the cost of per kilowatt hour of energy is either a little bit old or a little bit off. I know nuclear is a great option, but building new nuclear is super expensive. So new nuclear power is much more expensive than existing. And I think we've got to have grid scale solar, and we've got to have grid scale batteries, and you can't do it because of interconnects. How are you guys working to make sure that our grid is updated? I mean, I can't even pay less at night to charge my car. I'm paying the same rate no matter what time of day. So there's real things that could change today, not when nuclear is ready or not when geothermal is ready, today, that aren't controversial.
Yeah, and I do think that the things on our proposal can change today, but that's a good point. The nuclear number is for existing nuclear. New nuclear is not really an option right now, and it looks like that the companies that we're bringing back nuclear online, we're paying like 12 cents a kilowatt hour, so it's cheaper than the offshore wind, but we could do other stuff more affordably. So that's a good point. And sorry, the second data point was that you mentioned was, the solar. Yeah, well, it varies substantially. You know, if you're doing large-scale projects, you can get much better costs. If you're doing it in another part of the country, you get really affordable costs. Here, when you're doing the small scale, the economies just don't work as well. We need to do interconnection. I don't have a great answer on why they're slow on interconnection, the utilities. It's probably related to cost to some extent. Like, we need to do everything we can to make all these industries succeed and compete on cost. And I think that includes, trying to orient the solar industry to producing the lowest cost kilowatt hour that they can.
And I would say to you,
I hear that, and you're right, and part of it might be volume. I haven't heard a very clear reason or solution to that, although I've read a lot about it and I hear a lot about it. So I understand what you mean, and it's a totally valid concern, even from a Red Sox fan. But I'd love to hear turnkey kind of solutions on that. I haven't yet.
I would only add in your solar question on your car charging, the battery's the key. So if you have a battery, your battery can charge your car at night. So I would incentivize, not with the public benefits, but I would have a program where those of people that have solar now, instead of requiring to buy their solar energy back at an exorbitant rate, which is what we do now, give them money to put in a battery system or a tax credit for them to put in a battery system, and then that system will charge your car, do whatever it needs at other hours. That is the answer key, in my humble opinion. The other thing I would tell you, nuclear expansion at the Millport is actually, the governor is in negotiations with them to try and help them to increase their output. And that's a 5 to 10 year solution, maybe even sooner. So it's not that far off for them to increase their output. So instead of being 45 or 48%, maybe they can get to 60, 65% of our needs, and that'll drive down the cost.
All right. Hi, Trevor from Cascade. 2 questions, actually. Senator Fonfara suggested getting rid of our public benefits. So are you going to advocate for moving our guardrails, our fiscal guardrails? That's the first question.
Absolutely not. No way, Jose. I was here when it happened, and there's no way we should. We never should, and I will die on that hill.
Okay, but so how do we pay for the public benefits. First question. Second question is, I know we've been putting down cable in the middle of Lake Champlain to bring hydro from Canada. Now we have tariffs that are going to increase the cost of that hydroelectricity. Any thoughts on that? Because I think that was part of our long-term thought process.
And Trevor has a new radio show on WGCH, so do tune in. I'll be on next Wednesday, which is a Tuesday. Thank you for getting my schedule correct. It goes to show, Trevor and I competed in a campaign years ago, and we go on a radio show and talk about these issues because those disagreements shouldn't stop us from talking. To the point about the guardrails, we need to keep the guardrails. We have a $27 billion per year budget, and taking a few $100 million of public benefits and funding them through the general fund, and then a few $100 million and funding some of those through bonding, which we have a bonding cap of like $2.6 billion per year, is something, if we're smart, if we prioritize, we can afford. Again, if you have a $27 billion per year budget, you can find space to prioritize the most important things. And that's part of the argument, that the things that are superfluous or too costly will be cut down, and the ones that are most important, I think especially the energy efficiency conservation programs, will be retained, and I think they'll be made better. And we need to keep the fiscal guardrails. The thing I disagree with Senator Fanfara's proposal, and I tomorrow will vote to get it through committee, because I think the conversation needs to continue, is that there might be duplicate costs, some in the budget, some in the public benefits, and I need to make sure that the aggregate of those costs put together are limited. And then on the tariffs, listen, we should be concerned about any potential costs. I think our imports as a percentage of all our energy purchases in the New England grid is like 5 or 10%, and I think that one is the 10%, because it's energy. It's not the broad tariff, so it's probably going to be 10% of 10%. So it's something we should watch on the hydro in particular.
No, I was going to say, I'm pretty sure, too, by the time this all flushes out, that tariff will be gone. I'm hopeful.
A bit naive on, I guess, the legislative process. I mean, you can pass all these bills, so would Eversource be obligated to comply with whatever you come up with, or can they appeal? What is that? Do they need to negotiate with you on what their stance is? Obviously not yours right now. The second, it seems like you sort of answered about nuclear. It sounds like it's an energy source that scares me a little bit, but obviously expansion of that, building new plants, wouldn't that be an astronomical initially a price, or what's the long-term goal on that and the cost involved with that? So.
The answer is, like any other company or citizen of the state, that Eversource and other utilities are going to have to follow the law. I mean, they do lobby. Sometimes they disagree with things that we propose, but ultimately, what passes into law, everyone has to follow. And that's why there should be a regulator that is fair, but also tough, and make sure that laws are enforced in addition to passing good laws. And to the second point, yes, the problem with the existing nuclear plants need to stay online because they're low cost relative to other sources of clean energy to keep online. Creating new capacity is much more difficult, and we shouldn't be signing blank checks, whether it's a new nuclear plant or a new offshore wind or a new gas or anything. These should all compete on costs. And so my hope is that we're going to see innovations, whether it's battery or nuclear, so that we can produce new clean energy affordably. But I want to be kind of technology agnostic. I'm not like, this has got to be the way. We need to create a playing field where everyone has the incentive to compete and generate clean, affordable, reliable electricity. All that needs to be dealt with.
And I will tell you that one of the current members of Pura, Dave Arconti, new member, was the chair of the Energy Committee, a friend of mine on the other side of the aisle, but he believes in nuclear as well. And I think we can expand the nuclear generation at Millport to help us get through this.
So we're going to go to one more question, and before we do, I just want to thank you, Ryan and Tom, both for being here tonight. I know it was a race to get down here from Hartford, but as you can see, this is a hugely important issue for all of us, and I just want to thank you before we go to the last question, because I know everybody's going to race out of here when it's done. Okay, one last one.
Hi, I'm Andrew Watson from Wilton. I could see on your slide that lists all 57 public benefits programs, that Operation Fuel is included on that list. And I also noticed that on every Eversource bill that I pay each month, that it asks for a donation to Operation Fuel. So why is Eversource asking for that donation each month when a portion of my public benefits charge is already going towards Operation Fuel? It just seems unnecessary and greedy.
I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that we can find economies and, you know, support people who are in need without having excess programs and costs, and we have a lot of work to do to make those things more affordable. So thank you for the question. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mika.
Yes, and
thank
thank
you
you for
library.
hosting us. Thank you for staying. We'll stick around, and our emails and information are at the door as well.
And Ryan, don't go anywhere. I want to talk
Thanks,
to you.
everybody, for coming.